something that we always kind of knew and always followed, that, hey, the SEC and the Big Ten, those are the two best conferences.
Losing your quarterback multiple times during the season and not having a comparable backup quarterback, and then your backup quarterback goes down, now you're onto your third string. I think a lot of that put a sour taste in our mouth.
I think that the excitement and the brand recognition in the Big 12 is not going to dwindle with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. I think it's going to be a very exciting conference. All right, we are off and running on a brand new Big 12 edition of What's the Spread? How we doing? Miles on Sports here, Mr. Brad Thomas. We are about to kick off spring practices, spring games, MLB opening days right around the corner, Masters right around the corner. It's that time of year.
Miles, listen, I'm so excited for college football to be back that I'm literally going on the pages, and you know where they say X, Y, and Z quarterback practice highlights, and they're like 2 minutes long, and you don't see him doing anything but maybe stretching and making two passes. I keep watching him, trying to see, like, did he change his mechanics? Oh, is he going to be the number one? I've done it for pretty much like 6 to 7 teams so far. I'm glad we're talking about the Big 12. I'm glad that we can watch the March Madness. I'm glad that we'll be able to talk about the Masters together soon. Sports are really heating up. The World Baseball Classic was absolutely fire. Sorry we did not take home the belt, but when you texted me, what a compelling time to text me and tell me Ohtani versus Trout for all of the marbles. It was a great sports moment.
It was incredible. So why I thought today would be a great day to talk about the Big 12. Usually we like to preview the conferences, give our winner picks. We usually break it down by divisions. That's kind of being phased out. There's not really divisions anymore. But the Big 12, not only is it a brand new look this year, but it will be a brand new look next year. Oklahoma and Texas officially are getting out of their deal with the Big 12. They're heading to the SEC next year. There's so much happening. And I thought for you and I, who talk so much about group of 5 transitions and expansion and program building, that this would be a perfect opportunity for us to talk about these newcomers into the Big 12. What is it going to look like? How are they going to perform? It's compelling stuff, man. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's kick it off with, I'll tell you, a team and a program that we usually don't talk that much about, and that is BYU. They've been independent for so long, and typically about once or twice a year, we would have BYU one of our games, right? Typically they find themselves in a good top 25 matchup, especially in the 2020 season. But BYU is a really interesting addition up here into the Power 5. How are we feeling about these guys?
Dude, I actually think that BYU can have a pretty good season, right? If we're thinking about BYU, and normally what happens with BYU is they play these very tough schedules, right? Year in and year out. I actually think their schedule is much easier this year. It's going to be tough to go into the Big 12. We're not going to ignore that. But I mean, the games they play, they get some of the hardest games at home. They do have to travel to Texas, but when you look at a game with Kansas, is Lance Leopold going to replicate that success? A game against TCU, are they going to have that same success? A game against Texas, what do we know? I feel like BYU's schedule was much more difficult last year. I will say though, like of what happens in the big picture, out of the 4, BYU, Cincinnati, and UCF, Houston, I think BYU is in the worst shape. Ultimately, because when you're talking about a recruiting standpoint, I think those other teams have the upper hand. It may kind of balance out if BYU starts to become a Big 12 powerhouse, but in the first few years, I think it's going to be very difficult for them in comparison to the other teams.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, right? Because you've got Houston, deep in the heart of Texas. You've got UCF deep in the heart of Florida. Where is BYU recruiting from? This is essentially a Pac-12 school, competing in the Big 12. And the Big 12 is going to be a mix of Big 10 country, SEC country, Pac-12 country, which is what is going to make it such a compelling conference. But for BYU, I think they do have a lot of disadvantages. The location, I feel like, is a little bit of a disadvantage, even though I think it's one of the most beautiful stadiums in the conference, hands down, and in the country.
Yeah.
But you've also got the academic standards, and you've got the standards of who they let into their program. It is Mormon country. It's a little bit of a different feel in Utah. Now, we've seen Utah University have a lot of success in the Pac-12, and that's because of good coaching. Kyle Whittingham building a really good program over there. So I think that BYU can find that similar success. Love the stadium. The support from the fans is there. It's a big brand. So I think 6 wins is definitely doable in their first year. And I think that they can be in a Big 12 championship game here within the next 5.
Wow. In the next 5. I think you're saying that because a lot of that has to do with how hard it is to play there, right? Their home field advantage is probably one of the most difficult, one of the best in the Big 12 now.
Yeah, and I don't think any of these 4 schools here that we're going to talk about are winning this conference within the next 5, but I think that some of these schools can definitely make an appearance in that championship game, especially when Oklahoma and Texas leave town.
I totally get that.
All right, let's go ahead and move into the University of Cincinnati, one that we are very familiar with. We have had a game day in Cincinnati for a UCF Cincinnati game. But here is a program that if they had Luke Fickell, there would be no doubt in my mind, right, that they would be in great shape because Luke Fickell is that good of a coach. There's a reason that Wisconsin sold out everything to go and get a coach like Luke Fickell because he is that good. But now you got Scott Satterfield coming in here, and I am just not sure. What I am sure about is, from a brand perspective, the stability of Cincinnati. They've got the college football playoff appearance. They got a lot of brand name recognition that year that they made it, and a couple of years that Luke Fickell was there. The stadium is great. The history is really good. But is it a destination school for coaching?
No, not anymore. And Miles, you know what? When I was thinking about this, like bringing in Scott Satterfield to Louisville was such a great move from Appalachian State, right? But then bringing him into Cincinnati, it feels like a step down. Recruiting's going down. Coaching strength's going down. But then if we were to think about, like, let's just take Cincinnati and let's take West Virginia, right? 2 programs, both with coaching vacancies. If Satterfield gets hired at West Virginia, we go home run hire. My God. He could turn the program around. He gets hired at Cincinnati and we say, ooh, best you could do? It's going to be hard. Luke Fickell was that dynamic, that good of a coach, that good of a recruiter. It kind of set them back. Even if you look at the recruiting rankings just this year, I mean, it's kind of like now Cincinnati reminds me of what Louisville was going through in the ACC. And we're going to have Scott Satterfield, which is also a little unfair because Scott Satterfield's 76-48 in 10 seasons at Louisville and Appalachian State, but it's just such a massive drop off. I think that Cincinnati is going to see that drop off as well. I think it's a really good comp with Louisville in the ACC, coming from the American and coming from the Big East. This is a very similar move for a Cincinnati or a Houston now coming from their conference, the American, into the Big 12. And it's a completely different ball game here. And my concern is that, and it should be everybody's concern outside of the Big Ten and the SEC, is that these schools are going to continue to lose coaches to the SEC and the Big Ten. Because now, even more so, not only do we have the Power 5, but we have this Power 2 dynamic building that the national media built that narrative, right? Yeah. I mean, this is something that we always kind of knew and always followed, that, hey, the SEC and the Big Ten, those are the 2 best conferences in the country. But now because of media and TV deals and narratives, it's turning into a Power 2. So it concerns me that even though this Big 12 conference, there's a reason that Oklahoma and Texas left. Yeah. Let's just put it that way. And they will continue to see these coaches leave like Luke Fickell did for Wisconsin and leave the program in a situation like this where what is it going to look like? It's really an entirely new regime for Cincinnati now. They're almost starting over. But the only difference is you're not playing Tulsa every year. Now you're playing Baylor and Kansas State and TCU every year. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Let's talk about Houston. This is one that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on because I feel like Houston was kind of on the rise in the American. Now they go to the Big 12 and they're going to have to, I think they're going to have to claw and fight. But when we think about it, right, we think about the Big 12, Houston's style probably fits in best out of all of these teams. I think they're stylistically, they have an advantage over BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati. Yeah, I would agree with that. When you look at Houston, even before Dana Holgorsen was there, they had the identity of spread offense, throw it 60 times a game, hit you with the 5 wide, hit you with the speed. So it's been there. Now, the Big 12 itself, I see that dynamic changing, and we've talked about this, where the defense is becoming a little bit more important. But
does Houston's style that they've been developing for 10, 15 years, does that fit in, for an easier transition, at least in the short term? But my biggest question for teams like Houston and UCF, we're going to talk about in a minute, sitting in Texas, right? One of the biggest recruiting hotbeds in the country. But now that we've got programs like Houston moving up into the Power 5, and don't forget Texas San Antonio moving from the Conference USA to the American, schools like that, right? North Texas going from Conference USA to the American. So not only is it teams like Houston in Texas that are moving in the Power 5, you've got other Group of 5 teams that are moving into the elite of the Group of 5 conference. What does that do to recruiting? How does it, how is that going to evenly distribute from this point? Or does it not? Do we see better recruiting classes for teams like Houston more so than a BYU? Or
I think we do
struggle with competing with, Texas A&M also. They're also competing with SEC. There's a lot of competition in Texas right now.
I think they do, because you think about it, like, they're not going to recruit the same guys that are going to Texas A&M and Texas. They're going to try. And I think ultimately, most of the times, maybe 8 out of 10 times, they're not going to land that name. Now Houston, their main competition after this season, Texas Tech, TCU, and themselves. What I'm saying is they're going to have like that next tier of guy who wanted to stay home, right? But he got recruited by Houston before, when they were in the American. He wanted to stay home so bad, but he's like, I don't want to play for the G5. No one gets as much recognition in the G5. I don't have a chance to win a Heisman in the G5. Even if I become the best player in the country, I'm going to always have that stigma that he played in the G5. Now he wants to stay home. He's not that big. He's not getting highly recruited by a Texas, by an Alabama. By Texas. And he doesn't want to go anywhere like in Alabama. He can play in the Power 5 at Houston. And I think it's great. I think they'll see a little of that residual stuff, but it depends how big they swing, and I don't think that's a program that came into this conference not wanting to swing. Like, look at their basketball team. Their basketball team's recruiting at an absolutely high level. And I think their football team is going to try to set that same standard. But if they're okay with taking those residual guys, I think they're going to have a very good job recruiting in a very successful team. It's just these first few years in the Big 12 are so important for these teams because it's the foundation that they're building on. You hear Gus Malzahn talk about this all the time, that they want to win every game they play next year. But they know the most important thing is building that foundation, creating a recruiting hotbed, a pipeline, making players want to come to UCF. And I think Houston will have to take that exact same approach.
Yeah, so let's talk about UCF. I am concerned. I am concerned about UCF because of the way they're playing football right now. And I'm curious to see if you agree with me here. This is just from the eye test. I mean, being from Orlando, I watch UCF. I try to as much as I possibly can. I'm not a fan of the way they're playing right now. And I can't really put my finger on it, but it just wasn't competitive last year. It wasn't competitive enough for me last year. I think that they're falling short in some areas of their play. And it's not that I don't believe in Gus Malzahn, because I think UCF can come into the Big 12 and I think that they can have a lot of success. But I feel like they were kind of trending in the wrong direction a little bit, struggling with competition in the American. What do you think?
I actually have a different view. I think that UCF had a pretty successful season, especially with the adversity they had to face. Losing your quarterback multiple times during the season and not having a comparable backup quarterback. And then your backup quarterback goes down. Now you're onto your third string. I think a lot of that put a sour taste in our mouth. But the things that UCF improved were so important to creating a team that could win championships over the long term. They improved defensively. But how they improved defensively is probably the most important way. They improved tackling. They were a tougher team. Their offense is never going to be as high flying with John Rice Plumlee. We know that. But if you have that foundation of playing good defense, you finally get in, and this is no knock on him, you finally get in a more complete quarterback, you can open up the playbook a little bit more, and I think that'll allow UCF to blossom. When we talk about UCF, what you should be excited about, Miles, of these 4 schools, UCF has the highest recruiting ranking for the class of 2023, and they've done a lot of work in the transfer portal. I will honestly think that UCF, being in the Big 12, they will be the best recruiting team out of this group of these 4 teams because it's the largest school. Their facilities are amazing. They just finalized this brand new Nicholson Athletics Center. all this stuff is going to be so high tech and it's already nice. And I think with the money they have, it's just going to be almost an unfair advantage in comparison to those three other schools.
Yeah, and those are the two big advantages for UCF, right? Money, recruiting, location. Those are all huge benefits. And I've been saying for years that UCF was a sleeping giant. They just needed to get their opportunity, and they have it. But now they're going to be building their new foundation. They're going to be building their new foundation of a Power 5 team. I think UCF's going to struggle in this conference for a couple of years. And I could be wrong, but I think UCF is looking at a couple 3 or 4 win seasons here over the next couple of years. But that doesn't mean that now it doesn't mean that they can't build a really good foundation. As you said, with recruiting, UCF was consistently near the top of recruiting rankings in the group of 5. That won't change. I think that now they can only trend in the upward direction. But similar to Texas, got a lot of competition in Florida. But we've known that for a long time. UCF, this has been a climb. I remember being 11, 12 years old and going to the old Citrus Bowl to watch UCF play in the Conference USA Championship game. And that was like the pinnacle. I mean, look at where they're at now. UCF is a TCU success story waiting to happen.
Yes.
And I continue to bring this up. People forget, and I'm not saying anybody watching or listening, but I'm saying just people in general forget where TCU came from and how far they've come. People, TCU, as recent as 10, 15 years ago, was playing in the Mountain West Conference, and we just saw them play for a national championship.
Crazy.
It does and can happen. We talk so much, Brad, about college football being an unfair sport, right? And how Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State, the elites will always be there and they will always win titles. That may be true, but it doesn't change the fact that TCU got there and played for a national championship, and they were on the same stage with the Georgia football team, where Ohio State and, Alabama, they didn't get there. It just amazes me how far programs like TCU have come. And my point is that I see UCF being that kind of sleeping giant, similar to your point. They've got the support, man. They've got the brand, and they've been working at this for a long time.
A long time.
Can't wait.
A long time.
To see where this goes. All right. So that's the 4 newbies. Let's go ahead and move into our next point of conversation. We've already touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk about Texas and Oklahoma leaving the conference and what that is going to look like. Not so much in the SEC, because that's a whole nother thing that we can get into, what that SEC is going to look like. But this new look Big 12, top to bottom, what is it going to look like? Who's going to come out on top? Do programs like TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech separate themselves? Do some of these newbies separate themselves? I want to look at the next 10 years. And I'll go ahead and start it off with this point. I think the Big 12 is going to be one of the most fun conferences to watch every single year. I think it's going to be I think that the excitement and the brand recognition in the Big 12 is not going to dwindle with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. I think it's going to be a very exciting conference. I think that they're going to get multiple teams, probably about 2. I think that we could see 2 representatives from the Big 12 in a 12-team playoff every year. And because of that, it's going to be a very sought-after spot in that Big 12 championship game. And I think that because of what TCU has done, it's going to give that opportunity to any of these other 12 teams that are going to be in this league.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be TCU's league now. This is TCU. I think TCU benefits the most. And it's just perfect timing. They started to build this program at the right time. I also think that Texas Tech will start to grow. Texas Tech quietly, and we talked about them in our latest rankings episode. Yeah. Quietly is starting to put together a pretty good program. Someone's got to replace Texas, and just think about location. It's a harder sell to say, come to Kansas. It's a harder sell to say, come to Iowa State. It's hard to sell that. Easy to sell Baylor, easy to sell TCU, easy to sell Texas Tech, which I think those are the teams that are going to get the most benefit.
Yeah, I was just about to say those 3, Texas Tech, TCU, and Baylor. I think that we're going to see them separate themselves from the pack. When I was trying to do the exercise over the next 10 years, who benefits the most, those 3 schools benefit the most, and they all are in place with great coaches. Dave Aranda at Baylor, Sonny Dykes at TCU, Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. I think that those three could be there for a long time. And these could be end game jobs now because we're in the Big 12. And again, we went back to, does Cincinnati continue to lose coaches, to the Big 10? If the SEC comes calling, does TCU lose Sonny Dykes? I don't know. It depends. It depends on this 12-team playoff and what that looks like, and consistently what kind of success are they having. Keep in mind the Brian Kelly story. He was at Notre Dame for a long time, and when he realized that he didn't think he could win a national championship at Notre Dame, he made the jump to LSU to where he could win titles. So it comes down to, does this new Big 12 develop these teams where they can actually win titles? But I think those three benefit. But what about Oklahoma State? I feel like they're kind of the odd man out. What happens to Oklahoma State, who we talk about coaching consistency? Gundy's there, and it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. I mean, you got Kirk Ferentz, Mike Gundy, Kyle Whittingham. These are the most tenured coaches in the country. So what does Oklahoma State look like?
I don't know. I think that when I think of Oklahoma State, I think that they're going to have to make a home run hire. And that's no disrespect to Mike Gundy. It's just sometimes you have to switch things up. You have to get a fresh perspective, because what Mike Gundy is doing is sustainable, but it's not getting you to the playoffs. It's not getting you Big 12 championships. So I think at some point they're going to have to switch something up, unless they're okay with just filling seats and winning the games they can.
All right, before we wrap up today, let's go ahead and move into a little fun exercise. A lot of teams that we've already talked about in our top 25 rankings, a couple that we're going to talk about coming up when we start talking about our favorite games. But let's look at second-year head coaches. It was one of the craziest coaching carousels we've ever seen in the offseason last year. So now what's even better than seeing a coach in their first year is seeing how they continue to have success or stay stagnant. So buy, sell, or hold, Brad Thomas. Let's start with Brent Venables at Oklahoma. What do you got?
I was going to say buy. Right? I did this exercise, and then I got in my car. I went to the grocery store, and the whole ride, there wasn't one person on this list that I was thinking about except for Brent Venables. I'm selling. And that has to do with, listen, crazy stat. In 5 one-score losses, the Oklahoma defense was on the field for an average of 82 plays, 17% higher than the national median. I don't think he can turn it around as easily as the other schools were. He will have a great quarterback. That's no doubt about it. But if they cannot sustain drives, they're going to be on the field. It's hard to play defense. And maybe he might need to tell the tempo to slow it down. They have a fast-paced game. Jeff Levy instilled this quick, score fast. But when your defense is struggling and you're on the field a long time, you give up a lot of points, makes it way more difficult to win games. And I don't know if Brent Venables is the guy to do that, to turn it around. What about you, man?
Yeah, it was tough to see Riley leave. And when Riley left, their identity seemed to leave, where it's a little bit different, right? Where we were kind of talking about Houston was a good example of that was just, a program and identity that just kind of kept moving right here in the middle. But man, Oklahoma losing Riley, I feel like was a big blow. They tried to turn it around narratively, with Brent Venables. He's coming home. But is he the guy? I'm in a strict holding pattern right now with Brent Venables, especially for this year. But I'm telling you, when they move to the SEC, I don't think Venables is the guy. But for now, before selling, I'm just going to hold on him. To your point, my thing is can he develop an offensive identity? The defense didn't look any better either. I think DG can, and we talked about Dylan Gabriel. We talked about Oklahoma a bit. I think he can have a really good season, but there's a lot of people who've got Oklahoma back in their top 25s, back in their top 15s. I'm not sold on that right now, especially with how much competition is coming into the Big 12. I'm worried about Oklahoma. The brand is still there. The recruiting is still there. I get it, but losing Riley hurt, man. It hurt.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's move over to Mario Cristobal. I said sell. And I'm selling. I'm 5-7 last season. I just don't think he's the right guy culture-wise. Mario Cristobal comes in there and he instills this culture of these guys who don't want to do it the Miami way. Miles, I had a privilege of sitting down and talking with Michael Irvin. And what he talked about, who was their coach? Jimmy Carter? Jimmy Carter at first tried to change the culture of Miami Hurricanes, right? Because you know what Miami Hurricanes, they're about their swag. They're out there going and having fun. And Jimmy Carter ultimately realized that he can't do that. You can't change the culture of fun. You can make them more disciplined, is what Carter did. You can make them stay inside the lines of the game, what Carter did. But Cristobal wants to change the culture. I think they have a lot of work to do. That 5-7 season left a bad taste in my mouth. They did a great job in the transfer portal. They did great recruiting. But they also had a ton of guys leave to the transfer portal, and it wasn't because they weren't getting reps. It was because that's just who Cristobal is. You play his way. I was reading this interview from Cristobal where he said the only way for them to get better, and this was a paraphrase, so don't quote me, guys. The only way for them to get better was to get better by subtraction. Basically saying those guys that they lost, we're going to make their team better because they weren't guys who were good fits for their team.
I don't think that Miami can be saved the way that Miami wants themselves to be saved. This is a program that hasn't been who they are since 2001. I mean, we were 10 years old the last time Miami was back to what they think that they should be at. I'm not necessarily selling Cristobal as a coach. I'm selling this fit. I thought Cristobal was a much better fit at a program like Oregon. I don't know if anybody's a good fit at Miami for what they're trying to do because nobody can figure this out. And they keep thinking that the next guy will figure it out. And this is our guy. And this is our guy. At some point, it's you, right? At some point, you got to look in the mirror and you just got to ask yourself, do we even have an identity anymore? Are we Miami anymore? Where is it gone? I mean, I'm a big proponent of having your own damn stadium and your own damn campus. And it's ignorance, right, Brad? It's ignorance like that where you're continuing to play in Miami Gardens at the Dolphin Stadium. God only knows how far from campus. I think it's at least 30, 40 minutes away. It's that kind of ignorance and not wanting to build your own identity. And because they think they're Miami, that they're bigger than everything else, and you're not. I'm selling Cristobal here. I don't think it's working. I think last year was an absolute indicator of that. I think if Cristobal was going to be successful at Miami, we would have seen it.
Yes.
We already would have seen it. It would have been a 10-win season last year. So I'm selling a 5-win year. Not good. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Dan Lanning at Oregon, former defensive coordinator at Georgia. I'm buying Dan Lanning. And I was buying him when they hired him. I wasn't sure how I felt after that ass whooping against Georgia, but it was the way they came back, Brad. It was the way that is an indicator of coaching. That tells you who you have as your head guy. And I don't have to buy Lanning for, the next 10 years or so. I think Lanning's going to have a really successful run at Oregon, and I think he's going to go somewhere else. I think he's a damn good coach. Now, I did say in my top 25, he's got to figure out the defensive identity a little bit. But dude won 10 games in his first year, just keeping this program going. And again, coming back from that Georgia loss, got Bo Nix in the Heisman conversation. They were back in the playoff conversation. Buying this man.
I'm buying him as well. 10-win season. Get Bo Nix back. And you know what's crazy? They had a 10-win season, and they couldn't cover anybody. Their defense was god-awful. You know what? When you're so bad, there's only room for improvement. And to be able to win 10 games with that defense just shows you that I'm buying him. He's on the right path. Lincoln Riley, I'm on a hold pattern. I'm calling it a hold because it's hard to do much better than what he did last season. But what is he going to do when he doesn't have a Heisman quarterback? We know he's the Heisman quarterback guru. But at what point do you start wanting to change Heisman quarterbacks for trips to the national championship? So for me, it's a hold.
I'm going to buy Lincoln Riley. I'll buy him this year, and I'll buy him every year that he's in coaching college football. To your point, yes. I mean, what happens when he doesn't have a Heisman winning quarterback? But we haven't even seen it. We don't even know what it's like for him not to have a Heisman winning quarterback, which is why he's going to continue to get them. And especially this year, man. You got Caleb Williams coming back. The defense can't be any worse than they already were. In his first year, he was essentially a hamstring injury away of his star quarterback from taking them to the playoff in his first year. So I'll buy. All right, let's go ahead and move into Brian Kelly at LSU. Here's the thing. I am holding on Brian Kelly this year, and I'm holding on him long term. There's no doubt in my mind that he overachieved in his first year, winning the SEC West, beating Alabama. Unbelievable. He exceeded all of my expectations. It will go back to the mean. It will eventually go back to the mean for Brian Kelly at LSU. Now, LSU is a juggernaut. I'm not saying he can't win a title there. They just recently won a national championship in 2019. But I'm going to hold on him, especially for specifically talking about this year. Hold.
I'm buying Brian Kelly. Listen, great team, exceeded expectations, and this is not even really just a coaching thing. He has an unfair advantage out of all of these coaches. He will have a higher recruiting class than all of these coaches year in and year out. And when you recruit well and you have a tough stadium to play in, like, because we have to admit it, it's harder to play in Death Valley than it is to play over at USC. Like, it's just facts. You get a little bit of an advantage. So I'm buying him. And also he gets the next 2 more years with Harold Perkins, the quarterback of that defense. It makes life a little bit easier when you have a guy like Perkins out there.
All right. I'm liking the different answers. Let's go and round it out with Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. I'm going to buy Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. And here's why. Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, I think, can do exactly what Brian Kelly had been doing, just not to as high of an extent. And what I mean by that is I don't think Freeman's going to consistently have Notre Dame in the playoff every single year. But Notre Dame has made it very clear that is not their expectation. By letting Brian Kelly walk, their lack of resources that they've been giving to Marcus Freeman, their inability or lack of interest in joining a damn conference. Notre Dame has made it very clear that they're happy winning 8-9 games a year. So you cannot tell me differently that is what they're happy with. And if that's what you're happy with, then fine. I think Marcus Freeman is going to be a really good choice for them if they just want to keep that hold, win 8-9 games a year. And again, going back to the Dan Lanning thing, Notre Dame loses to Ohio State. Then they lose to Marshall. They also had a very bad loss against Stanford, but he still found a way to not let the season get away from him in his first year. And the guy's young, man. He's got a lot of learning to do. But from the Ohio State, I believe in him.
I'm hold on Marcus Freeman. But it's a more of a hold lean to a buy. And why that is because I wish the season last year extended 3 more games for Notre Dame. And I'd have a clearer picture. It's a Notre Dame team who was a different team from the beginning of the season to the end. And a lot of that has to do with Brian Kelly. With Marcus Freeman and changing the philosophy, making them want to play the way he wants to play. Well, now he gets Sam Hartman. Now he gets a real quarterback. He did all this with Tyler Buckner and God forbid the other guys. And now he gets Sam Hartman. He loses OC, but I feel like this is going to be a chance for them to easily have a 10-win season. So it's a hold, an optimistic hold.
Yeah, I really hope that Sam Hartman can ball out like you and I think he can. Because we've seen these high-profile transfers transferred into a new school and not meet expectations. If Sam Hartman plays like Wake Forest Sam Hartman, watch out for Notre Dame this year if they get a little offense going. Yeah.
Man, this was fun. Good. We might have to do this exercise a little bit more often because I don't think we've had something like this, and it kind of got me excited. But guys, listen, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, ring the bell so you know when we drop a new episode. If you are listening to us in podcast form, be sure to rate and subscribe. For Miles Markiewicz, I'm Brad Thomas. Best of luck. We will talk to you soon.